Domenic Carosa from Hivello is our title sponsor and keynote speaker today. He's been involved in the tech scene since mid-90s and been youngest CEO in a public company in Australian Stock Exchange, and been involved in crypto since 2013. So Domenic, please take over from me. Thank you so much.
Good everyone, good morning.
We hear you well.
Thank you. Thanks to Yuri and the team for organising the event. What I'm actually going to, I will talk about Hivello, but I'll do that right at the end. And just following on from the last panel around mega trends and what are some of the new trends, my view is, there's a segment called DePIN. It's a segment of Web3 that I want to talk about. Because I think it actually will revolutionise and change a lot of the existing infrastructure industries. And maybe before I do that, maybe just to start off and give you a story around, what is DePIN and where did it actually start? It actually started with NASA about 40 years ago. And NASA was collecting all of this data from its satellites around the world, but it didn't have the processing power, the compute power, in order to be able to process all of this data. And so they basically formed SETI, a third-party organisation that was responsible for going out there and thinking about this particular problem. And what they realised was NASA and the big government agencies may not have had or owned the infrastructure, but there were millions of computers around the world that basically, if you brought all of those together and created a decentralized network, there would actually be enough compute. And that was really the genesis. And so the way this worked was, and I remember doing this as a teenager in the 90s, where you would download the SETI application, and then every night you would get a download, and then your computer would process that data and then send it back to NASA once it was done. And there were millions of people like me around the world that were sharing our computer resources. Now, back then there was no blockchain, there was no crypto, there was no tokenization, and so as human beings, we want a reward. What's in it for us? And so back then, the reward was that if you basically found something, whether it was a new planet or some kind of a new life, it would actually be named after you. So there was actually a vested interest in you participating in this particular network. And what that basically showed 35, 40 years ago was that decentralized networks actually can play a role in building out future networks. And so that's really the, let's call it the concept, and that really paved the way for what we're seeing today. And so there's a new sector within Web3 called DePIN, standing for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks. They're always coming up with some fancy names, but effectively what it means is building out new networks. And I'll talk more about some of the opportunities that I see in the space, some of the specific verticals that I think are going to become quite interesting in the area. And so what SETI did was really just prove that decentralized networks can actually work. And you fast forward to where we are today, or X number of years ago, with the advent of blockchain and tokenization, and being able to incentivize the building out of these networks using tokens, basically internet money, as some people say. And that's basically helped spawn the development of multiple networks. And there's a concept in DePIN called cold start, and it's the chicken and the egg type scenario. On one hand, you need the network in order to be able to bring on the customers, and at the same time, if you don't have the customers, no one's going to go out there and build a network, unless you're a big telco or a big infra company, and you can spend tens of billions of dollars in doing so. So the concept of cold start is one that is particularly prevalent to DePIN. And what it basically means is that you can use the token to incentivize the first building out of the network, and then attract customers, which then obviously brings more revenue, and then continue to use that token to do so. And just one example, there's a DePIN called Helium, which is one of the earlier DePINs in the space. They were originally building out an IoT network, mainly in the US, and they were able to build 200,000 nodes in 2 years, which was really unheard of in terms of the kind of speed. They're now building out a infill 5G network in the US using the same concept, and I can talk more about that in a minute. One of the benefits of DePIN is that it's typically much faster to build a network than the traditional way. And what this basically works, and just to maybe give you an example of the 5G network, it's being built by Helium in the US. So any of us, if we were in the US, could basically buy a piece of hardware for about $1,000, and we install this at our office or our house, and we connect it to the Helium network. Now, the fact that we've connected that to the Helium 5G network means that we're now providing coverage in a specific area, and we're now getting paid in tokens, which we can convert into cash by providing that network. And so it's now not just relying on big corporations to build out networks. It's basically you and me. We can actually all participate in building out of these particular networks. And so it's becoming much faster to do so, and particularly for 5G, which is important for infill. And I won't go into the nuances of why that's important. And that's really just, once again, the Web3 DePIN flywheel, building out the network on the supply side by effectively providing tokens to incentivize that network, which then allows builders and people to come on board and start using that particular network, and you can kind of see how that flywheel will continue. And I think the other major shift is no longer will it be controlled by big organizations, big corporations. It will be the little person, the you and I, who will actually be part of actually building out that network, and hence the economic returns that come from that. So I think it's quite interesting. And if you think about the internet in the mid-90s, when the internet first started, it was actually decentralized. When I built a website, I would host it at my computer at my office. That's kind of the genesis of the internet. And then it went all the way to becoming much more centralized, and now with the advent of blockchain, it's really going back to the core, which is a decentralized future. To date, there are over 1,000 DePIN projects out there, and I'll sort of give you an example of some, and I'll do a bit of a deep dive on a couple of them. And by the way, I will have time for questions after this, because I'm sure there will be a few questions. And so there's over 1,000 DePINs. There are DePINs that require dedicated hardware, and then there are DePINs that can work on standard desktops and laptops and mobile phones. How many of us have got a spare desktop, laptop, or mobile phone sitting at home in the office? You could actually turn that on, plug that in, and actually be earning money and contributing, actually building out that network. That's really the major shift that's going on right now. And in terms of segments, there are, where do I think the real opportunities are? Storage is one segment. There's a big, some big guys out there like Amazon and Google. In my view, they will be disintermediated with decentralized storage because it will typically be faster and cheaper. The other will be 5G networks, particularly in the US, where there's a specific type of 5G spectrum that's actually available to do this, particularly for infill. because 5G is really good when it comes to speed, but doesn't actually go very far, and it doesn't really go through buildings well, which is why you need the 5G infills. And then obviously compute networks, whether it's CPU or GPU computes. Now, this slide's very difficult to see, and I apologise for that, but basically what it does, it just gives you a bit of a map around some of the different networks out there. And on this side, these are networks that require physical infrastructure, and then on this side are networks that can actually work on your mobile phone, your desktop, and your laptop. And if you ask me, what are some of my favourites, and the ones that I think in terms of the sub-verticals within DePIN, it's specifically around GPU compute, GPU hashes, because GPU hashes are used to train AI models, and we know that the requirement for AI, as in the GPU cycles, is growing astronomically, the demand from a demand side perspective. But on a supply side perspective, right now you've got your Google and your Amazons of the world, and now, only in the last 12 to 18 months, you've now got decentralized companies like Akash, Render Networks, GPU.net, that are now starting to evolve. And the whole philosophy around that is really quite simple. There are millions of gamers and people that have got a computer sitting at home or in their office. They can effectively share their GPU. Effectively, it's an NVIDIA graphics card. That's basically the underlying tech behind the GPU. And then contribute to this network that trains AI models. Now you ask, well, what's the benefit? Why wouldn't I just use Amazon and Google, which is what most companies are doing right now? Because the cost of using a decentralized network is about 80% less. 80. It's like material. If you're an AI company, it's material. And that's because the licensing requirements, when it comes to NVIDIA, if you buy a person at home and you buy an NVIDIA graphics card, will cost you about $1,000. If you're an enterprise, the same card will cost you 10 times the amount because of the licensing. So there are some real economic reasons why people are moving down the decentralized path. So in my view, I think we're now starting to see the emergence of decentralized infrastructure. It's still very early days. I mean, the term DePIN's only about 18 months old, and obviously we're big believers of the space. And by the way, I'm happy to share this deck with anyone as well. A little bit about Hivello. We started Hivello a number of years ago because we saw growth in DePINs. And second of all, there are 1,000 DePINs today, and there's dozens of new DePINs coming out all the time, and many of them are quite technically challenging. And our view was, well, how do we create a level playing field and allow anyone with no technical knowledge to be part of this DePIN opportunity? And so the whole notion of Hivello was basically born. And so you're able to take Hivello as an application, install it on your desktop or laptop, your spare laptop or desktop, and basically it will install the best DePINs, whether it's storage, CPU, GPU, VPNs. I won't get into all the technical nuances. Share your resources, contribute to networks, and actually get paid. And not just where I see big opportunities in Western markets, but in emerging markets. Because if someone can make an extra $50 or $100 a month, maybe for us may not be too much money. A couple of drinks will cost us that. Maybe not in Portugal, but in London or New York. But if you go into emerging markets, that can actually make a big difference. So I see significant opportunities in emerging markets, and thanks to VNTR, we're actually just about to launch a syndicate. And we're halfway through our raise that's being led by Animoca Brands, etc. So happy to discuss, and some of our team are here as well. So maybe at this point, I'd love to take any questions, whether it's about DePIN, Web3, what do I think of the price of Bitcoin, etc., etc. Definitely happy to answer any questions over the next 5 or 10 minutes.
If you have any questions, please raise your hand and I'll pass on the mic to you. I know everyone is being shy, but you can. Malik, do you want to say something? I can see it in your eyes. Hi.
Hi, Dom.
Yep.
So first of all, my real pleasure working with you, supporting you. And actually, my question is, if you look back at the projects like Filecoin, some early entrants, what do you think, like the next wave of the DePIN projects, like Akash, where they're doing better? And do you think like these like early entrants like Filecoin still have like some opportunity to like to stay in the game? So just maybe if you can like briefly explain about this.
Certainly. So for those that are not aware, Filecoin was one of the early DePINs, and what it required was you needed two things. One, you had to have your computers in a data center, which basically cut out 90% of the population, and you needed to stake Filecoin tokens, so you needed to actually be in the crypto space in order to do so. Some of the new groups that are now coming out will allow you to effectively share your storage on your computer, because we've all got gigabytes and gigabytes of storage, and you don't need to stake, or where you do, and this comes back to the Hivello opportunity, we make that whole staking process super, super simple. And staking, just for those that are not aware what staking means, is if you, say on the Filecoin network, you stake to prove that you're going to set up this network and keep it up. So you need to buy some Filecoin, you stake it, basically as kind of a guarantee. So, if you take the Akashes of the world, which is one of the leading, I think they've got a market cap of 4 or 5 billion last time I checked. They're actually very, very tech focused. So you need to be running Kubernetes instances. I'm not going to get into too much nerd talk, but to say it's like super complicated, which once again, why we created Hivello is so you can just point and click, and all that technical crypto stuff happens in the background.
Over there.
Domenic, hi. We've actually known each other for quite some time in the space, and I do have a tricky question for you. Are there any sustainable, at this point in time, are there any sustainable financial models underlying these DePIN projects? Because Helium, I'm an early investor into Helium. So it was a flop with IoT, complete flop. It's more sustainable with 5G. Now, are you aware today of sustainable startups in terms of the underlying financial model?
Yeah. So thank you for your question. That goes around the demand side. Is there demand for DePINs? And my view is right now the whole industry as a segment is about 18 months old. So it's a very, very new segment. And if I go back and look at where I think the demand is, and I come back to my GPU question, that's where there's, in my view, significant opportunity right now, purely because there is a big demand for AI training, i.e. basically GPU hashes, and there's a significant cost benefit from going down the decentralized path. And my view is, sometimes the question is, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And my view with regards to DePIN is it's the egg. First of all, the network needs to be built, or a large part of the network needs to be built, and only then will the big demand start to arrive. And I caught up with the guys at IPC who are actually building storage and an internet protocol, and they're actually going after big business, and they've actually got over 1,000 big businesses now starting to use their software. So and these are all kind of technical decisions that the IT departments will make. I assume no one in the room would be making a decision on do I use this hosting server or this other hosting server. Yes, so we've got maybe time for one or two more questions.
So thank you. So could you speak a little bit more broadly around the tokenomics? So, for example, with Helium, if the tokens are being used to incentivize the node participants, does that necessarily mean that the token issuance, the number of tokens in supply, is inflationary, or is there some other mechanism to distribute and help the token appreciate rather than get diluted?
Yeah. Yeah, so part of it, and all DePINs have a slight nuance when it comes to, when we talk about token inflation, as you're building the network, you're basically paying out tokens. So the number of tokens is expanding, is inflationary. And just to take 5G an example, which is growing, they've got 100,000 users in the last 6 months in the US, so growing faster than any other network in the US. As people now come on to use Helium 5G, and they're doing this in conjunction with some of the big telcos like T-Mobile, they're generating that revenue, and then that revenue is being used to buy those tokens on market and burn those tokens. Now, I've just used, I know a bit more nerd talk, but basically what that means is buy the token and burn it means reduce the supply, which means reduce the inflation. So that's the whole concept around it. And my personal view will be there's 1,000 DePINs now. In the next 5 years, there'll be another 4,000 or 5,000. So there'll be thousands and thousands of DePINs, and most of those will fail, like most other tech companies. And that's part of the reason our whole genesis around Hivello was we're not trying to pick the winners. We're the aggregator of the DePINs, and it doesn't matter who wins. Ultimately, we will let the data determine what are the best DePINs to run on your particular machine to maximize your ROI. So that's kind of our view and take on the whole space. Maybe got time for one more question, sir, or a couple more questions.
Thank you.
That's okay. Just talk up loudly, and I can.
Where's the Domenic star? No, that was not my question.
Sorry, where?
Okay. I know this is not the business model that you are, or that one should look at, but just to get a picture, if I buy hardware and connect to the Filecoin or Helium or to Hivello, what kind of yield do I expect on that hardware investment from connecting to a network?
So to answer that question, it varies according to...
Obviously, but if you take the top...
if you take today, based on the Akash price or one of those, you could basically do an ROI in 6 months of the actual hardware. But that's going to ebb and flow over time, which comes back to why we've focused down the Hivello route, because with Hivello, you don't need to actually buy any hardware. You use hardware that you've already got. Your BYO, bring your own hardware, because we've all got desktops and laptops sitting at home and at the office, basically just sitting there gathering dust. And so that's the whole premise around it. And as the crypto markets, and I know there was discussion around the elections. I'm not from the US, I'm from Australia, but I'll tell you, Trump is good for crypto. And I think Trump will be extremely good for the economy as well. And as soon as when I say the US announce that they will add Bitcoin as part of their strategic reserve, we're going to see Bitcoin go to a couple of $100,000, if not $500,000 in the next, and I'm talking, in the next 6 months. So that's my personal view. And without sort of wanting to digress, Bitcoin, and I know a lot of people here think it's internet money, and I'd say go and do a deep dive. It's actually anti-inflationary. There's only ever going to be 21 Bitcoin, and if you want to actually follow someone, a guy called Michael Saylor, go and actually follow him online. I think he's an absolute genius, because he looks at Bitcoin in the sense of it's not just basically let's call it a value, a tool there. It's actually a software company. So it's like investing in Microsoft in the 80s, and that's his analogy, because Bitcoin it's not just about the Bitcoin price, it's actually a technology and a software entity at the end of the day. But I'm happy to have a Bitcoin or other philosophical conversation about crypto later on today, because I'll be here.
So you are talking mostly about hardware. What about electricity and the research that powers the hardware?
Still within 6 months, in terms of if that Akash example that I gave, because there's just significant demand. That obviously includes electricity baked into that.
Perfect. Any additional questions, guys?
That was my job. Thank you. Where?
Yeah.
Yay.
And what?
I'm coming, 2 seconds. Can you please throw it into the gentleman behind you? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Panis. I'm actually my only Bitcoin fan, not the other crypto coins. But what about the energy concerns, about your decentralized infrastructure?
Yeah, and that's the other point. I didn't get onto the ESG opportunities with decentralized infra. It's hardware that's already sitting there rather than being thrown into scrap. So it actually makes a significant difference from a pollution, like a hardware pollution perspective. And if you work on the basis that homes, offices are going to be connected to solar and have a battery, so effectively becoming self-sustainable, it actually makes a lot more sense from a power perspective as well. And there was actually one that we were talking to yesterday. If you took the power used in data centers, which is like huge in terms of building out these data centers versus decentralized network, it's like more than 50% less power for the same output. And I'm talking DePIN as opposed to Bitcoin specifically. So love to take, I don't know if we've got time for one more question. There's from the young lady over there. One last question.
I'm coming.
And by the way, I'll be here, the team will be here all day. We've got a stand out there. I'm happy to talk nerd talk, like, just come and ask me questions, or you can ask about Hivello. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the new information for me. I was wondering what the hell to do with my old laptop and was going to donate it to an NGO in a favela. And I wanted to see if you're interested in potentially doing a pilot project together.
Come and talk to our team. We've got, who's over there, and we're going to stand. That's actually part of, we're actually working with groups out of Africa and Asia, where a lot of Western countries will be donating their laptops, but then how do you can use the laptop to do many things, but can actually also generate income? And using DePIN and obviously using Hivello is an opportunity to do that. So there are so many, not just commercial opportunities, but also altruistic opportunities in the space as well. And we all benefit.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for your time.